The courtroom smelled of old wood and arrogance. Evelyn stood silent as laughter echoed from the defense table. Her stepmother Margot's laughter, the kind that sliced deeper than words. Lucas leaned back, smirking, whispering something that made the clerks chuckle. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but the verdict was already written in their eyes. She was nothing. The forgotten daughter. Evelyn's hands tightened around the envelope she carried. Her father's final letter. Unopened, unclaimed, unspoken. They thought I'd buried her with his memory. But what if the truth hadn't died with him? What if the real will was still waiting, just not in their favor? The door opened. The judge entered, and silence fell like a blade. Evelyn didn't hear the judge's first words. Her mind replayed Margot's laughter, like a song she'd been forced to memorize. For years, that sound had followed her. Through eviction notices, through job rejections, through nights of staring at her father's portrait, whispering promises to the dark. She remembered the funeral, the cold rain, Margot's crocodile tears as she handed Evelyn a forged will that stripped her of everything. And Evelyn had signed the papers back then, broken and numb. But she'd kept the letter. The one her father's lawyer said was never meant for court. It was meant for her. That letter, now sealed inside the envelope, was more than a memory. It was the fuse to a reckoning. The judge cleared his throat, beginning the session. The air thickened as Margot's lawyer spoke of family loyalty and Evelyn's emotional instability. Evelyn didn't respond. She let the accusations flow over her like rain on stone. Every lie was predictable. Every insult rehearsed. Her stepmother watched her with false sympathy, the corners of her lips twitching whenever Evelyn refused to defend herself. But the quiet woman they mocked wasn't the same one they had destroyed. This Evelyn had come prepared. Her silence was strategy, her weapon invisible until it struck. As testimony began, Evelyn's memories slipped between the judge's words. She remembered Margot tearing up the old will in the study years ago, that single rip echoing louder than thunder. She remembered Lucas leaning in, whispering, "You don't belong here." Those moments burned behind her calm eyes. She'd lived with nothing so long that loss no longer frightened her. Only truth did, and she was ready to unleash it. The court saw her as small, fragile, beaten. But beneath that quiet, something ancient and deliberate was awakening. When the judge called for recess, Margot turned, her perfume thick and sweet, her voice dripping false pity. "You should have stayed gone, Evelyn," she murmured. Evelyn smiled faintly, just enough to unsettle her. "You'll wish I had," she whispered back. As Margot's heels clicked away, Evelyn sat again, unfolding her father's letter for the first time. The handwriting trembled, but was unmistakably his. Her heart pounded. The words began with her name. For the first time in years, she almost cried, not from pain, but from the power of what she now held. The rain hadn't stopped that night. It beat against the Barlow mansion's stained glass like angry hands. Evelyn stood by her father's study door, listening, hearing voices she'd come to dread. Margot's syrupy tones slithered through the crack. "She doesn't need to know everything, darling. Let the lawyers handle it." Her father's cough followed, weak but defiant. "She's my daughter, Margot." That was the last time Evelyn ever heard his voice. By morning, the house was silent, the doctor gone. And Margot's crocodile tears had already begun their show. That same day, Evelyn was told she inherited nothing. No warning, no goodbye. Just an eviction notice signed in Margot's perfect cursive. The funeral had been a performance. Black umbrellas, crocodile sobs, cameras for the press. Margot clung to Evelyn's arm for pity's sake, whispering lines for the world to hear. "We'll take care of her. Always." But when the cameras vanished, so did her tenderness. Lucas handed Evelyn a manila envelope, the official will. One glance was enough. Her father's name was forged, his signature wrong. Evelyn looked up to see Lucas smirking. Guess he didn't love you quite as much as you thought. That moment, the cold buried something in her. Not grief, but resolve. Years passed like silent winters. Evelyn lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, working late nights, saving every dollar. She watched from afar as Margot and Lucas paraded their new wealth, selling her father's land, hosting charity galas, smiling in newspapers. Each headline was another spark, feeding her quiet fire. Then one morning, a letter arrived from Thomas Hale, her father's old lawyer. "I think it's time you see something he left behind," it read. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Thomas Hale met her in a quiet cafe, the kind where no one listens. He looked older, his voice rough with regret. "Your father didn't trust them," he said. "He knew Margot would try to take everything. So he left something with me. Something even the courts can't deny." He slid a small, sealed document across the table. Evelyn's hand trembled as she touched it. "He wanted you to have the truth," Thomas said softly. The cafe clock ticked, the world shrinking to the sound of paper against wood. When Evelyn opened the seal, she found her father's handwritten confession. A note explaining how he'd discovered Margot's betrayal, and a true will naming Evelyn as the rightful heir. He'd hidden it for her protection, fearing what Margot might do if she knew. Evelyn's breath caught, tears slipping quietly down her face. It wasn't just inheritance anymore. It was justice, long delayed. For the first time in years, she smiled. It wasn't joy. It was the calm before a storm that would drown the Barlows in their own deceit. Evelyn didn't rush her revenge. She built it piece by piece. The way her father built his empire. Quietly, deliberately, unseen. Every night she studied legal precedents, traced forged signatures, and gathered proof of Margot's lies. Her walls were covered in newspaper clippings and court filings. Thomas guided her carefully, warning her of Margot's influence. "You only get one chance," he said. Evelyn nodded, her eyes calm but lethal. "That's all I'll need." She had already filed the petition to reopen the estate. The court date was set. The same courtroom where they'd humiliated her would now witness their undoing. Thomas met her in the courthouse hallway a week before the hearing. He carried the original documents in a locked briefcase, his expression grim. "You understand, once this starts, there's no going back," he warned. Evelyn smiled faintly, the kind that hides exhaustion and fire. "I stopped looking back a long time ago." The two walked side by side, their reflections trailing across marble floors like ghosts of a buried past. Every step echoed toward justice. Margot's camp didn't stay idle. She sent her lawyers to intimidate, her friends to gossip. Headlines called Evelyn the delusional daughter. Lucas mocked her online, but Evelyn didn't respond. She knew silence was more powerful than rage. Every insult they hurled only amplified the weight of the truth she held. Even the judge had begun to notice her calm. The kind of calm that precedes storms. And when Margot's lawyer tried to schedule a private settlement, Evelyn refused. "We'll let the truth speak, where everyone can hear it." Margot prepared her defense like a queen guarding her throne. She wore jewels to every pretrial meeting, laughed loudly, and spoke as if victory was inevitable. Lucas shadowed her, feeding her arrogance. Yet beneath her perfection, cracks began to show. Evelyn noticed it in the trembling of Margot's hands, in the way she avoided eye contact when Thomas entered the room. Gilt leaves, fingerprints, and Margot's were all over the forged will. Evelyn simply waited for the right moment to reveal them, in public, under oath, in the very hall where she had once been silenced. The night before the hearing, Evelyn stood outside the Barlow mansion. The iron gates were locked, the gardens untended since her father's death. She pressed her hand against the cold metal, staring at the dark windows that once felt like home. "You took everything," she whispered to the wind. "Now I'll take it back." Lightning flashed, illuminating the house. Beautiful, decayed, hollow, like the family that ruined her. Tomorrow, the truth would be spoken aloud. and every lie would burn in daylight. The first day of trial arrived like a storm that had been building for years. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse, reporters shouting Evelyn's name as though she were a scandal, not a survivor. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Margot sat poised, a perfect portrait of grief and control, while Lucas lounged beside her, arrogance wrapped in silk. Evelyn entered last. She didn't look at them. Not once. Her steps echoed, calm, measured, terrifyingly composed. When she sat, she placed the real will on the table before her, still sealed. Margot's smile faltered for half a second, a flicker of fear beneath the gloss. Margot's lawyer began his attack with venom cloaked in charm. He called Evelyn emotional, misguided, misled by a disbarred attorney. Each word was another blade meant to make her bleed in silence. But Evelyn didn't flinch. When her turn came, she stood and spoke softly, each syllable slicing through the air like truth made of glass. "I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because my father's name was stolen, and I'm here to return it to him." The courtroom went silent. Even Margot's smirk faded, just slightly. When Margot took the stand, she performed like a seasoned actress. Her tears were perfectly timed, her tone dripping with sorrow. "I loved her like my own," she sobbed. She sobbed. The crowd murmured sympathetically, but Evelyn only watched her, patient, silent, predator calm. When Thomas handed her the forged will as evidence, Margot's eyes widened just slightly. The seal, the signature, the ink, all wrong. Evelyn waited for the moment the mask would slip. Every liar eventually forgets their lines. Lucas's arrogance betrayed them next. Called to testify, he laughed at the accusations, claiming Evelyn was obsessed, delusional. "My father never wanted her in the will," he said smugly. But when Thomas projected the handwriting comparison onto the courtroom screen, Lucas's forged signature beside the real one, the room fell into breathless silence. Even Margot froze. Lucas's smirk faltered as his own lies burned bright before everyone. Evelyn watched without smiling. Revenge wasn't joy. It was justice. Finally breathing. When the court adjourned for the day, Margot stormed past Evelyn, fury trembling beneath her elegance. "You don't know what you've started," she hissed. Evelyn turned, her voice soft, steady. "I know exactly what I'm finishing." Outside, the reporters swarmed, flashes burning against the gray sky. For the first time, Evelyn didn't hide. She faced them head-on. The daughter once silenced, now standing in the full light of truth. Tomorrow, Judge Reynolds would read the wills aloud. One forged, one real. And when he did, the empire of lies would collapse. The second day began in perfect stillness. No whispers, no laughter. Even Margot looked uncertain now, her mask cracking at the edges. Evelyn arrived early, her envelope clutched tightly, the one she'd waited years to open before the world. When the judge called her forward, she didn't hesitate. She placed the letter on the bench. "This," she said quietly, "was written by my father in his own hand." Thomas stepped beside her, unfolding the parchment for the court. Margot's face drained of color. Lucas looked away. For the first time, Evelyn's voice didn't shake. "You forged the will," she said to Margot. "But you couldn't forge his love." Thomas read aloud, his voice steady. "To my daughter Evelyn, I leave the Barlow estate and all holdings therein. She alone has my trust and heart." The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Margot rose from her seat, shouting, "That's a lie." He was confused. Her words echoed hollowly against marble walls. Judge Reynolds silenced her with one stern look. Evelyn didn't react. She only watched. Years of humiliation, of silence, of exile, all dissolving with every line spoken. The truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the world now. Lucas broke first. Mother, stop, he whispered, panic seeping into his tone. The audience turned. Margot froze mid-breath, glaring at him. You knew about this, he said louder, pointing at the letter. You made me sign those papers. His voice cracked, and the room erupted in murmurs. Evelyn didn't gloat. She only watched as the walls of deceit crumbled from within. Margot's fury turned to desperation, her voice trembling now. It was for the family, she cried. But the word family sounded poisonous now, stripped of its disguise. Judge Reynolds asked for silence, but none came. The truth had exploded like thunder. Margot tried to compose herself, to find some dignity in the wreckage. The will was a mistake, she whispered, voice breaking. But Thomas stepped forward again, holding up the forensic report. This signature, he said firmly, was written by Lucas Barlow, not Arthur Barlow. The courtroom gasped. Lucas sank into his chair, face pale, hands shaking. Margot closed her eyes as if the world had finally gone dark around her. Evelyn, for the first time, allowed herself a single tear. Not for them, but for the years she'd lost to their greed. The judge called for adjournment until the final reading. As the gavel struck, Evelyn felt the weight of 10 years lift from her chest. Margot didn't meet her eyes as she was escorted out by her lawyers. Rage, disguised as grace. Lucas followed. Silent now. No trace of laughter left. Thomas placed a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Your father would be proud, he said softly. Evelyn looked up toward the high windows where sunlight pierced through gray clouds. He already is, she whispered. Tomorrow, the final judgment would come. And with it, the end of the Barlows' reign. The final hearing began beneath an eerie calm. Even the air felt heavier, charged with the scent of truth about to be spoken. Reporters filled the benches again, pens ready to carve history into headlines. Margot entered without her usual confidence, her pearls gone, her smile missing. Lucas followed, head lowered. Evelyn sat tall, her hands folded over the open letter that started it all. Judge Reynolds entered, his gavel striking once, the sound sharp as lightning. Today, he said, we will hear the reading of Arthur Barlow's authenticated last will. Every eye turned toward Evelyn, but she didn't move. She simply exhaled, waiting for justice to breathe at last. Judge Reynolds began to read. His voice filled the chamber like scripture. I, Arthur Barlow, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills and declare this my final testament. Margot's breath caught. The judge continued unrelenting. I leave the Barlow estate, business holdings, and all properties to my daughter, Evelyn Barlow, as sole beneficiary. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like thunder. Evelyn closed her eyes. Every humiliation, every sneer, every night alone. All of it dissolved in that single moment. Margot reached for Lucas's hand, but he pulled away. The empire she'd stolen had finally slipped through her trembling fingers. Margot rose to speak, but the judge raised his hand. Sit down, Mrs. Barlow. The evidence is conclusive. Her defiance collapsed into silence. The courtroom murmured like a sea turning against her. Evelyn didn't look at Margot. She didn't need to. Revenge wasn't about seeing them suffer. It was about being free of them. The chains that bound her to their cruelty had finally fallen. Thomas nodded toward her from across the room, pride softening his stern face. Evelyn smiled faintly, the smallest gesture of peace in a war finally won. When the gavel struck for the final time, it sounded like thunder breaking through years of silence. This court recognizes Evelyn Barlow as the sole heir of Arthur Barlow's estate, Judge Reynolds declared. The audience erupted, half in applause, half in disbelief. Margot sat frozen, her expression hollow, her hands limp in her lap. Lucas stared blankly ahead, every ounce of arrogance gone. Evelyn stood, bowed her head respectfully to the judge, and gathered the letter. For the first time, she didn't tremble. The truth had finally spoken, and it spoke her name. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed wildly. Reporters shouted Evelyn's name, demanding statements, sound bites, tears. She said nothing, just smiled. Small and genuine. Thomas joined her at the steps, handing her the official ruling. "It's over," he said. Evelyn looked at the horizon, the sea glittering beyond the city. "No," she whispered. "It's just beginning." Somewhere behind her, Margot's car door slammed shut. A sound of endings. Evelyn turned toward the sun and walked forward, the heir to her father's name, her truth, and her peace. The world finally knew who she was. The gates of the Barlow estate creaked open for the first time in years. Evelyn stood before them, the keys cold in her hand, the air thick with memory. The mansion loomed ahead, vast and silent, its once manicured gardens overgrown but still proud. She stepped through slowly, her heels echoing across the stone path her father used to walk. Every shadow, every window carried ghosts of laughter, of betrayal, of love lost too soon. Inside, dust floated like fading secrets. She whispered softly, "I'm home, Father." For the first time, her voice didn't tremble. It was steady, strong, hers. Inside the mansion, silence spoke louder than sound. Evelyn walked through each room slowly, the library, the dining hall, her father's study. She traced her fingers over his old desk, still scarred from the day he'd signed her first scholarship check. The air smelled of paper and rain. On the mantel sat a photo, her and her father, smiling in summer light. She smiled back faintly. The house was not empty. It had simply been waiting for the right voice to fill it again. Later, Thomas arrived at the estate carrying the official transfer documents. "It's all yours now," he said, setting them on the table. Evelyn looked around the vast room and smiled. "It always was," she whispered. Thomas hesitated, studying her expression. "What will you do with it?" Evelyn glanced out the window at the sea beyond the cliffs. "Restore it," she said softly. "Not just the house, the name." For her, victory wasn't about taking back what was stolen. It was about rebuilding what was sacred. News of the verdict spread fast. Margot's social empire crumbled overnight, her accounts frozen, her reputation shredded. Lucas left town quietly, his arrogance dissolving into silence. Evelyn didn't celebrate. She sent no messages, no taunts, no revengeful words. Justice had already spoken. She found peace not in their downfall, but in her father's portrait hanging above the fireplace. "You can rest now," she murmured, voice trembling slightly. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from release. Weeks later, the mansion bloomed again. The gardens trimmed, the halls alive with light. Evelyn walked along the balcony at dawn, the sea wind carrying the scent of new beginnings. She wasn't the girl they once pitied, nor the woman they mocked. She was the heir, the builder, the survivor of her own storm. As she looked out toward the horizon, sunlight breaking across the cliffs, she smiled to herself. "Justice doesn't erase pain," she whispered. "It teaches you how to stand taller." The camera would fade there, on her face, radiant and unbroken, as the house behind her breathed again.